Welcome back to Irina's art studio, and today is the day 2 of Pomegranate a day. We're painting Rosh Hashanah cards. Today we're going to use this paper, and to cut it we will need the pencil and the ruler and the scissors. And then you can put them away. We're not going to use pencil anymore. We will use watercolors. And for this project, it doesn't matter what kind of watercolors you have. This is a student grade set and it works just fine. I would like to use some salt. Make sure it was stored in a closed container. Either white oil pastel or white crayon. That's what we need to create the resist here. For embellishment, if you would like to do the embellishment, I use those little jewels and a crazy glue. Sometimes the jewels come with the adhesive already, but mine don't, so I'm using crazy glue. We will need a couple brushes. Now this brush is here. This is your main brush that you will need for the project. And if you have a fan brush, a fun fan brush, that will be a good one to do splatter. So we don't have to have it, but if you have it, use it. Paper towel, water. To mix the colors, I'm using a little plastic lid from a container. If you have a palette, use your palette. You can mix the colors right on the paper. I'm using this little piece of scratch paper to try the colors on it sometimes. And a good idea is to use the same quality of scratch paper as the quality of your main paper. This card is gonna open like this in a landscape format. I'm going to paint on this part. For this card, I want to use a wet on wet technique, and I'm going to wet the area, but not the whole paper. If you see, I left little margin. It has to have a hand-drawn imperfect look. So homespun imperfect. So what I'm doing in the beginning, and you can use a bigger brush if you have a bigger brush to do that, I'm just wetting the area. And then I'm going to use a little bit of yellow. My first wash is going to be very light. So I'm going to use some yellow. If it's hard for me to move the paint on the paper, that means that I don't have enough water. So maybe you need to have a little bit more water. So I'm adding a little bit of that and a little bit of orange. But I'm not trying to mop my orange everywhere. I'm taking some orange, adding it in different places, and just letting it be. A little bit of green, but I don't want a very dark green. So take my scratch paper and check my green. This green is a little bit too dark. I'm adding yellow to it, and diluting it with water, so it's not the dark and very potent green. It's just a little bit of green here and there. At this point, I think I have what I need for the first wash. It has to be very light. So for this one, I'm gonna wait for it to dry. So if you are impatient and you don't want to wait for it to dry, you can actually use your hair dryer. Make sure that you don't have big puddles, puddle like this. If you start using hair dryer on this puddle, it's gonna spill all over the place. So you can clean your brush, dry it on the paper towel, and it's called thirsty brush because the brush is thirsty, is gonna drink the water from the puddles. And now you can use your hair dryer. your painting is dry, and we can proceed with the crayon. I'm going to draw with my crayon or oil pastel. If I draw something with a pencil and draw with a pastel over it, the pencil will never gonna be erased. Like, for example, if I write my letters and I'm going to go with this pastel over, I'm gonna smudge the pencil and it will never gonna be able to erase it after. See, this is what happens. So that's why we're not going to use the pencil. We're going to try our best to write and draw freehand without pencil. You just have to make yourself a plan. The pomegranate crown is gonna happen here, and then the pomegranate is gonna be here, and then this is where I'm gonna write. Now you cannot erase the crayon or oil pastel either. As soon as you make a mark, it's gonna stay there. So be very stingy with your marks. Think before you do it, and when you put the mark on the paper, it's gonna stay there. You cannot erase it. So let's try. It's gonna be hard to see, but we're gonna do our best. I drew the outline of the pomegranate and I wrote the letters Shana Tova. Now I want to do some embellishment inside. You don't have to copy that. You can come up with anything you want inside the shape of the pomegranate. So go ahead and do some markings inside the pomegranate. And when you draw with your oil pastel or with your crayon, make sure that the marks are not very faint, because if they're not strong enough, they're not gonna resist the watercolor. So what our goal is to draw the barrier for the watercolor, because the watercolor is not gonna mix with the oil or wax that's in the pastel and crayon. So we need to create this barrier. So it looks like I did it. Now I'm going to take my colors again, and I'm going to take a little bit bigger brush. The softer brush you're going to be using, the better, because when you paint on top, you really do not want to smudge the crayon. So be very, very careful and think of not smudging it. Like, I barely touch the paper. I'm adding the water again on top. You don't have to go to the very edge of the previous wash, just approximately. So after I added the water, I'm gonna add some orange color. So now my second wash is gonna be darker than the first one. And notice what happens. My crayon created this resist, and my watercolor doesn't stick to the paper where the crayon was. I'm gonna go into different colors, like I'm gonna take a little bit of red and a little bit of orange, and you can go with the brighter colors if you want to. Do not use too much water. Do not create many puddles, because that could work against your goal. Too much water can go over the letters. So we'll just be, again, if you created too much water, we can take the thirsty brush, clean, dry it on the paper towel, and let it drink the water from your painting. You can also, if you have, you can use the same brush, but better if you use something like this. Fan brush works the best. You can take a little bit of green and do some splatter on top. And because the area is still wet, the splatter will start dissolving. At this point, you can also add a little bit of salt, as long as it's still wet and as long as you have enough pigment on the paper so it's not too light. And make sure that your salt was not sitting on the counter opened. Take a little bit, like a pinch, and season your painting. And this is something that really depends on how much water you have, how much pigment you have on paper, what kind of paper you're using, and also even weather conditions, if it's very humid or is it not humid at all. It's like the results of this salt will depend on so many factors. But you can try and see what works better, and maybe next time you're using it, you're gonna have a different result. So for the salt to start working, we need a little bit of time. You can again wait for it to dry or use the hair dryer. So now it is dry and you can remove the salt. You can now sometimes some letters disappear, and if you don't use enough force with your crayon, some letters disappear and not gonna show after you paint. So what you can do is to use white gouache, or I have this, it's called buff color. So like this color with addition of some white gouache or even white gel pen, and go over some areas that did not work very well. Because this is supposed to have a imperfect homespun look, it's okay if it doesn't have perfect lettering. So you can add a little bit of white if you have the white paint, or you can go over with a white gel pen. You can even add a little bit of dimension to the letters. It's really hard to draw with a white crayon without seeing what you're actually doing. Now I want to embellish it. Those are little jewels for nails decoration. So you can use anything that will look decorative to you. You put some of your jewels on the table. You can use tweezers, or you can use this crayon itself. I'm going to take my crazy glue and add little dots of glue everywhere I want my jewels to go. And maybe start with a few, and you can always add to them. So you can take your crayon and it sticks perfectly to the crayon. When everything is dry, you can go ahead and remove the salt. You can see that the salt creates a little bit of a texture. This is your second day of pomegranate a day. If you have little different paints, that will result in a little bit more texture from the salt. So I was using a different paint set for this one. So this didn't create me as much texture, but it's still there. And this is our second one. The first one was the fun character. Second one is resist technique. Stay tuned for the printed card. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.